Okay, in honor of Thanksgiving coming up, I got The Thanksgiving Story by Alice Denglish, illustrated by Helen Swindle.
I don't forget what I said. I'm going to read after you, right?
Okay, you can read it after I do. At the end, okay? The Thanksgiving Story. This is like a really good, detailed book.
I like that book.
This is the story of the first Thanksgiving in America. It happened more than 300 years ago.
300 years ago.
That's what it says.
More than 300? Cool.
2 ships and a big adventure. It was a summer day in England. Giles, Constance, and Damaris Hopkins were on their way to America. As they waited with their father and mother on the ship, they could see a great deal going on around them. They were in the harbor of a town of Southampton. So many ships were in the harbor. 2 of them were taking on food and water and all the things needed by people going to a new country. The larger ship was the Mayflower. The smaller one was the Speedwell.
Mommy, the Speedwell just had accidentally got out, leaking it, and then it sunk.
It did. Okay.
But don't worry, all the people escaped. Yeah,
Okay.
so I get that mixed up.
Men, women, and children were on the ships with their bundles and their boxes. To the children, it was a great adventure. Anything might happen on the ship. Something special would happen to the Hopkins family on the long voyage.
Twin decks.
The passengers were on the Mayflower and the Speedwell were of many different kinds. All of them were settlers going to settle or make homes in a new land. Some of them were the people that we call pilgrims. A pilgrim is a person who travels to a far-off place because of his religion. In England at the time, everyone had to go to the same church. The pilgrims wanted to be free to have their own church, to worship God in their own way. So they left England and gone to live in Holland. Now they had come back from Holland to sail for America. Some of the people on the ships were servants, and a few were hired workmen. A carpenter like John Alden would be useful in the new land. Some people were going just for adventure. Others were going because they thought England was crowded. There would be more room to farm in America. Between the decks, there was a room for space for the passengers. The sailors called this the 'tween decks. In the lower part or hold of the ship were barrels of water and food. There were seeds to plant and tools for planting them. There were saws, axes, hammers for building houses. Some of the barrels held things for trading with Indians. There was a bright-colored cloth. There were beads and knives and little mirrors, all things they had heard Indians like to have.
Mommy, and guess what?
What?
If it were a bad storm and instead of drinking water, they would drink beer out of some of those barrels. And I think when we talked about this at school, I think it said 160 it held 160 barrels.
Okay.
And it was about as big as Mrs. Lloyd's in my room and my classroom, and Mrs. Lloyd's classroom, my classroom, and Mrs. Layrock's classroom to make the Mayflower.
Okay, yeah, that sounds about right, or maybe even more. Now the time had come for the ships to start on the great adventure. The children would have liked to be on deck, to see the land as they sailed away from it. But the sailors were very busy. The captain gave orders for passengers to stay down below until the ships were out of the harbor. Only the sailors could be on the deck while the sails were being set. How crowded it was below decks. Passengers had small mattresses on the floor, each close to the next one. There were some wooden bunks or ship beds. A few people had cabins. In their cabin, Giles, Constance, and Damaris listened. They heard the rattle of a chain as the anchor was raised. They heard the sailors singing. They heard the creak and creak of the ropes as the sailors worked with the sails. The big white sails would fill with the wind and move the ship across the ocean. May we go on deck now? Not until the sails are set. More strange noises and more time to wait. Then the ships were out in the ocean. Soon the captain of the Speedwell put up a signal flags. These flags told the other ship that the Speedwell was in trouble. She was leaking and could not go on. Perhaps her captain was afraid to take such a small ship on such a long voyage. Both ships sailed back to land. Some of the passengers from the Speedwell stayed in England. Some of them went on the Mayflower. That made the Mayflower more crowded than ever. There were 102 passengers on the small ship. Many of them were children.
And there were more than that. There were 30 more. And that would make 132 people on the ship. And there were more than 102.
A ship sails alone. This time the Mayflower sailed from Plymouth. Out onto the wide ocean went the little ship. Now she was all alone. Soon even the seagulls that followed her had flown back to shore. Many people were seasick. Others were sick because they did not have fresh fruit and vegetables to eat. Most days they ate hard biscuits and salted or dried meat. A few times a week they could make a charcoal fire on sand placed in an iron box and sit around to get warm. Then they cooked a big pot of porridge or stew or soup. Nothing felt so good as the warm food in the stomach. Warm days, sunny days, gray days, rain days. Then came a big storm. How the waves beat against the ship. Everyone was afraid. Perhaps they would have to go back to England.
Wait, Molly. They had the most horrible one after the horrible storm. After that horrible storm, it was even worse.
Okay. After the storm, the sea grew calmer, and the Pilgrims gave thanks to God. A baby was born to the Hopkins family, a baby brother for Gills, Constance, and Damaris. What was the new baby to be called? Some of the children on the ship had names like Love, Resolved, Humility, and Remember. There seemed to be only one name for a child born on the ocean, so the Hopkins baby was called Oceanus. The Mayflower sailed on and on. The days and nights grew colder. There was plenty of time to talk about Virginia, the part of America where they were going. It would be warm there, with sunshine and flowers and green trees. As the days went on, more people were sick. Would the food and water last until the ship came to land? Some of it would have to be kept for the sailors on the ship going back to England. 2 months went by. Everyone was tired. No one was very clean, and there was no fresh water to wash in.
When they got to America, there was a pond.
At last, one day, a sailor called, "Land ho!" What a hurry and scurry up on the deck there was as passengers tried to see the shore. As the ship came near, they could see evergreen trees growing near the water. It was not warm Virginia, with its sunshine and flowers. It was Cape Cod, and its winter. There were no friends to welcome the Pilgrims, no houses to live in, but they had come to land, and so they knelt to thank God for bringing them safely to the new country. They sailed a little farther and came into a sheltered harbor. Everyone would have liked to go on ashore to walk the good firm ground. The woman could hardly wait to wash all their dirty clothes. But first some of the men went to see if it was safe. There would be Indians. The settlers had heard all kinds of stories about Indians, so the men carried their guns. They would not shoot except to protect themselves. One of the men who went ashore was Miles Standish. He was a soldier and had been training some of the men to use guns. Another was Stephen Hopkins, father of the Hopkins children. On the Mayflower, Gills, Constance, and Damaris waited and waited for their father to come back. Oceanus slept and slept as babies do. The men waded through the ice-cold water, pulling the ship's boat up on the beach. They walked along the shore, and there seemed to be nothing but sand and more sand. They cut some sweet-smelling branches of juniper, a kind of evergreen, and took them back to the ship. That night the sailors had a warm, good fire. Some of the women and children on the Mayflower went ashore as soon as they could and had a wash day. There was a pond of fresh water near the beach. It was good to have clean, fresh clothes again. The Mayflower had brought a small sailboat or fishing boat. This had to be taken ashore and mended. Some of the men worked on it. Meanwhile, other men went on looking for corn. They had heard about it from others who had been to this new land. They would trade with Indians for seed to plant. If they could not find corn, everyone might die of hunger. The seeds they had brought from England might not grow. They looked everywhere. Once they saw some Indians and a dog, but these ran away into the woods. They kept on looking. No corn. but an old kettle half buried in the sand. A ship's kettle. How did it come there? No corn, but a pot hung over a place where a fire had been. No corn, but small hills of sand. The men dug down into one, and there was a little old basket filled with corn. Now they had corn to plant. They found other baskets. These were big baskets, and it took 2 men to carry one. They filled their pockets with corn. Some day they would find the Indians and pay them for it. One day they did see some more Indians. These Indians were not friendly. They shot at the settlers with their bows and arrows. The men shot back with their guns. After the Indians had gone, the settlers picked up many arrows on the sand. Now the people on the Mayflower decided to sail across the bay and find a place to build their homes. They sent the fishing boat first to find a good harbor. Then the Mayflower sailed across to a place marked on the map. It was called Plymouth. The settlers called it New Plymouth because they had sailed from Plymouth to England. It was a cold December day when some of the settlers landed. Once again they knelt and thanked God for his care of them. This was a good place for homes. Indians had lived here, and there were fields where corn had been grown. There was rich black earth for planting and plenty of fresh water.
Carter,
Just a second. New homes in a new land. The winter was not a cold one, but it seemed long to the settlers. Many of them were sick. Many of them died. It was a sad time for everyone. Some people stayed on the ship and others went ashore to work. They took with them some boards that they had brought on the ship. They also cut down trees and made rough boards. First they built a house to hold food, and some of the sick people stayed in this house. There were 2 smaller houses. One was used to keep supplies, and one was for the sick people. One terrible night, the thatch roof of the larger house caught fire. From the Mayflower, Gills, Constance, and Damaris could see the flames. The men on shore put out the fire. With a great deal of hard work, the men built 7 small houses. Now the Hopkins family had a home of their own, and at last spring came. Why don't you read this from right there and let me head into the bathroom real quick.
There were new leaves on the trees, and flowers in the woods and fields. Birds sang in the trees. The country was no longer cold and wintry and bare. It was spring and friendly and beautiful. Almost everyone was weak and thin, for there had been so much sickness and not enough to eat. The weather for planting seeds was coming. And Gills, Constance, and Damaris were happy to be out in the spring sunshine. Ever since they had landed, the settlers had been finding new trees and plants in this new land. They also found many trees and flowers that they had known in England. They told each other about them as if they were meeting old friends. There were oaks and walnut and birch trees, ash and wild cherry and plum.
And here were strawberries and watercress. In April, the Mayflower went back to England. Now the settlers were alone in the new country, alone except for the Indians. Sometimes the settlers saw smoke from the Indian fires. They saw Indians too, but the Indians always ran away. One day, a tall Indian walked right into the village and spoke to the settlers in English. He had learned it from some of the sea captains who had come to that part of the country. His name was Samoset. The people of Plymouth were surprised to see that the Indian wore so few clothes. It was still cold weather, and how could he only have a little piece of leather around his waist?
That was his belt.
They gave him an old coat. Later he brought another Indian named Squanto, who spoke better English because he had been taken to England on a ship. The 2 told the pilgrims why there were so few Indians in that part of the country. Many of them had died of a sickness. It was fine to have a friendly Indian there in the daytime, but when night came, the settlers wished he would go away. He stayed, so they let him sleep in the Hopkins house, but watched him all night. Did Gills, Constance, and Damaris stay awake wondering about their strange visitor? We do not know. After this, the Indian chief, Massaset came to visit. The people of Plymouth made a place for the chief outside of one of the houses they were building. They put boards and blankets on the ground and a green rug and cushions for Massaset to sit on. The Indians came to the meeting wearing leggings of deerskin. Their faces and bodies were painted in bright colors. The chief was painted dark red, and he wore a necklace of white beads. The settlers went to the meeting in their best clothes, with the trumpet and drums. The governor wore a red sash and feather in his hat. The settlers gave the Indian chief 2 shining knives and a copper chain to hang around his neck. Massaset promised to be friendly. When his people came to Plymouth, they would not bring bows and arrows with them. The promise of friendship was kept for 50 years. Squanto, the friendly Indian, stayed in Plymouth. He showed the settlers how to plant corn in the Indian way. The Indians put small dead fish in each place where the seed was planted. This fertilized the corn and helped it grow. That year, men, women, and children worked hard planting, and that year was a good crop of corn. Everyone worked together in the harvest. Okay, there's a little bit more. We're going to have to skip it because we have some more to do. I want you to cut these words out and put them in the column where they belong and glue them. So
Is that all we're going to do?
We'll do that, and if we have time, then I'll finish this, okay? And I've got to go get Carter off the potty.
After you get him off the potty, we'll do some more after this.
I'll read it to you while you're cutting. How about that?
Okay, that's good. I want to get this off.
Okay, I'll read while you're cutting. How about that? The time of Thanksgiving. The Pilgrims decided to have a special day to thank God for all He had given them. They had done this at harvest time in England. Now they wanted to have a Thanksgiving feast and invite the Indian chief and his people. And what a feast it was. Men went out into the woods and shot deer and wild turkeys. The women cooked and baked. Only 51 settlers had lived through the winter, and half of them were children. Only a few women to do all the cooking, but the older children helped as much as they could. By now, Oceanus Hopkins was walking, and the new baby, Peregrine White, slept in his cradle. Peregrine was born on the Mayflower when it was arched off of Cape Cod. His name meant wanderer or pilgrim. The day of Thanksgiving dinner was warm and pleasant. Long tables were set out of doors. Probably the pilgrims dressed in their best clothes they had. The men were wearing their big, white, wide hats instead of work caps. Then Massaset, the great chief, came, and the settlers must have counted the long, long line of Indians that followed him. 1, 2, 20, 40, 50, 60, yes, there were 90. Somehow there would be food for all. And there was. Massaset and his men had done their share, for they brought deer to the feast. The Indian chief and the governor of Plymouth sat at one table. Some sat at tables, some on the ground. Elder Brewster, the minister, said a prayer, giving thanks to God for homes, food, and safety in the new land. The Indians may have understood about the prayer, for their people had a Thanksgiving prayer of their own. They gave thanks to their God, who made the trees grow, the corn grow, and all kinds of fruit. That's a cool picture. After the feast, the settlers played games. The Indians danced. Miles Standish brought out his soldiers, and they drilled as the Indians watched. The Indians stayed for 3 days. The Pilgrims did not forget the hard times. They knew there would be difficult times to come. Still, they felt they had many things to be thankful for. They had food, houses, and warm fires. The Indians there were their friends. They were free in this new land, free to work, to make their homes, to worship God in their own way. Perhaps they sang the hymn they had brought to the new world with them. Praise God, for whom all blessings flow. Praise Him, all creatures here below. And if they did, Gil's Constance and Damascus sang with them.
Okay. We're sorry about that. My mom's gonna take care
That was a really long book. I didn't realize how detailed it was.
It's the most detailed you've ever seen. See?
Mhm.
So detailed.
We got that somewhere. Did we get that at a thrift store or something too? Get it done, dude. You cut and I'll organize. That way you can just look at them.
Make sure you put the O and the odd ones.
I'm not lining them up in a certain way. I'm just lining them up to where they're all facing you. Is that it? Oh, I thought that piece fell. Uh-oh. All done. Okay. Alright, now the fun part. Let me see those scissors.
Gluing. There are two missing pieces because there's no more.
That's
They
okay.
have just to fill the whole page.
Go girl.
Oh, and for wrong. There's pictures up there that help me.
Tell me what.
Hey, ask me some questions about Thanksgiving, please.
I don't think I have any questions for you.
About that story you just read to me.
What were the name of the two boats?
What?
I said, what were the names of the two boats?
Speedwell and Mayflower. How about the other three that Columbus went on? Columbus Day.
Hey, quit playing with the glue.
Pretty hard to do. Oh, there it goes again.
Ew. Ew, is that the last of that glue?
Yep. Last of that glue.
Ew. Okay. We'll just put them where they go. Let me look at them. Just set them in their section. No. Just put the words in the right section.
What? Why?
Because I want to see if you can get them right.
Oh, I need to do it.
You don't have to.
I can't do it without glue.
You can. You can put them on there and let me see if you can get them right.
And then we'll put them on with glue.
Yes. Why don't you say the word out loud? What was that word? Say the words. Why?
Just like being quiet.
I don't know if that one's right. What is that supposed to be? O, some, O.
On sock, O in bone.
Okay, some. That's not right.
Oh, it's an.
That's why I want you to say them out loud. Say the word out loud.
That's the only loud ball.
I don't care. I still want you to say them out loud.
I check.
No, say them all now. Go.
Rock, job, hope, joke, thought, hot, broke, road, some.
What's that?
Hold.
And it goes with the O sound.
Spot and pot. Let's see if there's a pot in it. Well, we're gonna.
Home.
We have our own
Bone.
home, and we're inside our home right now. Wow, it's
Chop.
chop,
Sock.
hole.
Bone. Hole. Is that right?
Oh.
Stove. Bone. Clock. Nose. Rope. Are you sure that's right?
Yep.
No, that's trash.
Some come. That's the eyeballs.
Alright, good job. I'm gonna let you do this one. I'm gonna let you read through it and I'm gonna time you real quick. Okay?
Wait, no,
As a
Mommy.
closer. We'll glue that after I turn this recording off, okay? Thank you, ma'am, for participating. Being such a good participant. Okay?
Let's turn it off.
I want you to read this and take your time and do a good job. Read it out loud.
Okay. It was summer. The bright sun would warm the field. Grasshopper enjoyed the fine day. He hopped and sang and danced in the grass. At the edge of the field, Grasshopper saw a line of ants laying corn and seeds. I'm glad I found you, said Grasshopper. There are just enough of us to play baseball now. The ants did not stop.
Speak out loud where I can hear you.
I mean, we'll start me all. Do you want me to start all over?
No, just right here. Where you are.
We don't have time to play. We are getting food for winter. You would be smart to do the same. Grasshopper couldn't believe what he was hearing. Winter? Why worry about winter? The cold won't be here for a long, long time. Right now we have a beautiful summer day. We should have fun. The ants kept going and the grasshopper hopped away. Summer faded into autumn. Autumn turned into winter. The gray days were short, and the black nights were long. A thick blanket of snow covered the ground. Grasshopper couldn't dig deep enough to find food. He was too frozen to sing and too hungry to dance. Not knowing what else to do, Grasshopper staggered to the ant hill. He pounded on the door. I'm here to share your food and warm fire, he said. The ants slammed the door in his face.
Wow, that was good. You didn't make any mistakes. I like that you're reading slower and pronunciating. Whenever you say it out loud and you pronunciate it, you're doing a better job reading than when you go like this, and then you kind of start skipping stuff as you get ahead of yourself in your mind, I think. Good job.